So lately I found myself listening to a lot of neo-prog bands. So what I'm going to do today is present a starter pack. Those who love the genre and kind of want to check out some of where the music came from. Those who are new to the genre and want to find out where it came from and kind of where it's going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a band, an album, and a couple of songs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of structure this into two ways. The first is going to be required listenings. These are the albums that you absolutely need to listen to if you want to get a good idea of the overall genre of neo-prog. And the other one is recommended listens. These are the ones that if you like this, go for this kind of an idea. Let's dive in and discover some of these albums. And first off, you can't really understand neo-prog without understanding the roots. And so the first group and album that I'm going to recommend as a required reading actually doesn't come from neo-prog at all. It comes from one of the forefathers of progressive rock, and that is Genesis. And the album that a lot of people have attributed to being kind of the first pseudo neo-prog album was Trick of the Tail. Now, in my mind, this isn't necessarily the one that you need to listen to understand neo-prog and where it came from. Rather, that would be The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, the last album to feature Peter Gabriel. And here's why you need to listen to this particular album to really understand where neo-prog came from. With Peter Gabriel on the vocals and the lead lyricist, it really shows the dramatic and theatrical quality of neo-prog, especially in the 80s and early 90s. Songs such as The Lamia, as In the Cage, as even The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, these guys really showcase the theatrical nature of neo-prog. It has the sweeping soundscapes of the guitars, especially within The Lamia, that Steve Hackett provides, and this is being a direct emulation for artists to come. So you really need to listen to that to really understand where neo-prog came from. From there, some recommended listens would definitely be Trick of the Tail. I would actually put Wind and Wuthering higher on that scale because it still has that kind of melancholy feel to it, as well as And Then There Were Three. So those are some of the ones that you need to really listen to kind of understand where neo-prog came from. Now from there, I'd be remiss if I didn't identify the #1 contributor and really the starter of the whole movement, which is Marillion. Marillion was the first to really gain success as being that neo-prog group with their album of Script of a Jester's Tear. This is the album that really started it all. If it wasn't for this guy, there probably wouldn't have been such a strong movement and such imitators afterwards. Anything from this album is just a masterpiece. My favorite is the title track, and this really shows, again, the theatrical quality of neo-prog, the sounding guitars and the synthesizers, and it also feels very 80s, but not in a bad way. And what I love about Marillion is their unapologetically indulge in the music. And this was something that wasn't seen at all in the 80s. And when I say indulge in the music, I don't mean necessarily pouring their hearts out in the music, because that was seen. But what I'm talking about is just stretching the piece of music and letting it grow and not stopping it because it didn't fit into the 3 to 4 minute box. And some recommended listens are definitely the albums that preceded that within the 80s. Definitely Misplaced Childhood. I was debating which one to say as the required listening, but Misplaced Childhood is still a brilliant and a masterpiece of music. Now, I'm also going to recommend a lot of albums moving forward in Marillion's discography, because Marillion really helped shape the 90s as well as a little bit of the early 2000s of what the music was going to be. In the 90s, I gotta say a required listening is of Brave. Now, when Fish left the band in 1989, Steve Hogarth was brought in, and Steve Hogarth brought more of a poetic sense and less of a I guess fiery poetic. Like, I mean, Fish was definitely that fiery poet, but I feel like Hogarth is a little bit more of a reflective poet. And so Brave is a fantastic album, and it really shows where NeoProg was in the 90s. Much darker, less theatrical, a little bit more reflective. The 90s were a little bit of a floundering decade for NeoProg because we didn't quite have the same amount of enthusiasm that we saw within the 80s. But within the 2000s, another required listening is Marbles. I know I'm kind of cheating here with 3 albums from the same band, but again, it really shows the different decades. Marbles shows where it was within the 2000s, with being a little bit more optimistic and stretching the songs out to a little bit longer as well. The Invisible Man, Neverland, and Ocean Sky, I think it was, Ocean Blue. These 3 tracks are well into the 10-minute marks, even into like the 16-minute marks, and it really shows what music could do at these times, as well as being a little bit more accessible. And this was something that NeoProg could never really say until I feel like Marillion dropped Marbles. And some recommended albums from these periods, within the 2000s, it would probably be Happiness is the Road, and within the 90s, probably Marillion.com, just with Interior Lulu. Some really outstanding tracks there. So moving away from Marillion for a little bit, let's go on to one of their contemporary artists within the 80s, which is IQ. IQ is a brilliant add-on and really helped push the movement within the 80s. Within the 80s, they produced and released their album Tales from a Lush Attic. Now, that is a recommended listen. My actual required listen is actually their 2006 album of Dark Matter. I always say the first album you listen to IQ is going to be your favorite. It's kind of like Doctor Who, right? The first Doctor is going to be your favorite. Very similar to IQ. And for me, that was Dark Matter. And why I chose Dark Matter over their entire discography, because really any album of theirs could land here, is the darkness that's felt within this. And this really showed the climate of the early 2000s and the 90s. The use of the organ synth on here is just dripping, and it really shows the use of that longer stretch of the Harvest of Souls. Just a brilliant piece, and that's one thing that NeoProg does very well, is the longer stretches of songs. It also shows the interplay between the guitars and the lead keyboardists. And it really also showcases that melancholy and that passion. The Red Dust Shadow really showcases this at building up the song and really letting it flourish. And it shows kind of where NeoProg was at this time. Now, a very heavily recommended album is also The Seventh House, specifically for 2 songs, and that is The Seventh House, the title track, as well as Guiding Light. Because this really shows that interplay between the guitars and the keyboards, and some of the guitar work by Mike Holmes just grabs my soul and doesn't let go. And I almost put this one as the required listen, but the rest of the album doesn't quite get to that same level that the overall enjoyment of Dark Matter did. Another definite recommended listen is Ever, their 90s album. And again, that really showcases where NeoProg was within the 90s. Now, as I said, NeoProg has gone through a lot of twists and turns. In the 80s, it was a direct call out to like new wave and punk. Within the 90s, it was more of a self-reflection and a little bit of a stagnation. They didn't quite know where to go, but there was still some amazing albums that were being produced at that time. But within the later part of the 2000s, there was a huge shift that happened, and no band really showcases this shift better than Frost. And some people have even credited Frost as not being a NeoProg band, but I feel like this shift within NeoProg was captured perfectly with their 2 albums that they put out in the later part of the 2000s. Million Town, required, was produced in 2006, and it showcases more of a symphonic sound, and that's kind of where NeoProg was within the first half of the 2000s. It had a very heavy emphasis on the longer stretches of songs. There was this overflowing of sound all the time. Within the title track of Million Town, it just provided such a great, optimistic outlook on the music. Now, pair this with their 2007 album of Experiments in Mass Appeal. also a required listen, where the songs are shorter, they're much more punchier, they're darker, they're heavier, and this is where that shift happened. I can almost pinpoint it right at 2007, where a lot of those bands that were kind of flirting with the symphonic side of NeoProg definitely shifted into the darker atmosphere by providing shorter tracks, punchier tracks, and heavier tracks. Where we've got songs like Dear Dead Days that still have that kind of symphonic sound, but in a much more heavy and clear-cut way. The title track of Experiments in Mass Appeal is much darker, and that's seen a little bit within the IQ's album of Dark Matter, so we kind of saw the shift taking place. And finally, the last one that I'm going to touch upon is looking more towards the future, and that would be with the band Anubis. Now, they're a lesser known neo-prog group, but they have put out masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece, and it was really hard for me to narrow down which one I wanted to really start this all off with, but it would definitely be their 2011 album of A Tower of Silence. And it's on this album that it really showcases where neo-prog is kind of now. It's taken the influences from the past decades and kind of boiled it down into the essence and then moved forward from there. The albums that came afterwards, the Hitchhiking to Brezin Team, I always mispronounce that one, as well as the one that they released earlier this year of the Second Hand, it really showcases, again, where neo-prog is going with being heavier but being lighter by providing both the yin and the yang. They're masters at really capturing this. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't at least touch upon individual songs that really helped me understand and get into neo-prog as much as I did. The first one is definitely Galahad, and the songs are from Empires Never Last, with the title track of Empires Never Last, as well as This Life Could Be My Last. The heartfelt laments that are going on in this group really showcase that theatrical side of things. And speaking about theatrical side of things, Pendragon is another one that you really need to listen to, especially within that transition. Anything that they put out post 2007 is a lot heavier than their releases that they put out in the 90s. And the one that I'm going to recommend from the 90s is from their album Masquerade Overture, and that's Paintbox. Paintbox provides that very theatrical, very stagey, showcasey, and similar to that, and almost the flip side to that, is Arena. And Arena is another band that you definitely need to check out. Just with Tales from a Lion's Den, as well as Visitor. But the one that I want to kind of shed some light on is Immortal, with the question mark, so Immortal? And that is with the Butterfly Man. This track showcases that darker side of things. It's almost the flip side of neo-prog that Paintbox had. If Paintbox was very I guess optimistic and joyful sounding at times, but still being sorrow, Butterfly Man is that darker side. So we've got that yin and yang playing again. Another one that you definitely need to check out, and this is more of a deep cut, so we're getting really deep into neo-prog here, so this is only for those who have spent some time with the genre, and that would be Mystery, a Canadian neo-prog band, so I gotta call out my Canadian boys, and their album The World Is a Game. They've got such beautiful songs on this album that you really need to check out. Each one is just fantastic. And the last one that I'm going to call out is Comedy of Errors. Now, a lot of people would probably say that Fanfare and Fantasy is the one that you need to listen to, but I would actually recommend the album that came after that, of Spirit. This guy really shows where neo-prog is going in the future, and I'm really excited for that. Even though they take the main hook from Tales of Lush Attic and The Enemy Smacks, but I'm gonna put that aside and just really recommend that album. That's one that you need to listen to. So there's my box. There's some tools for you to check out. Let me know of your own starter kit for neo-prog. What are some bands that I didn't mention that should be there? What are some specific albums and songs that you would also recommend as well? Let's start that conversation by commenting down below. But that's about it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to be doing a couple more of these starter packs, probably for progressive metal, as well as tech metal, as well as the avant-garde, as well as retro prog, which is a little bit different than the neo-prog in my mind, as well as other genres. So I'm really excited to try this out and see how it catches on. But that's about it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys, as always, are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.